Okay, today we're going to finish with Unit 1, covering topics 1.8 and 1.9. And so, what we're going to look at with 1.8 is constitutional interpretations of federalism. All right, so how has the Constitution, specifically the Supreme Court, viewed the issue of federalism whenever there's an issue between the states and the federal government? So, a couple of key terms before. Number one, federalism. Obviously, we've been covering this yesterday. I'll cover it again today. It's a division of power amongst the federal and state governments. We should have that. Now, the 10th Amendment, specifically mentioned in the Constitution, is also an amendment that says that, hey, if this topic or idea is not in the Constitution, it falls to the states. It's up to the states to take hold of it and run it to their discretion. And so that's one part of the FRQ that I have assigned that I'm looking for when the FRQ is asking for, like, how does federalism serve local interests? Well, it's all about the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment allows states to put their personalized stamps on issues like schools and determines exactly how they want to run them, what are the procedures for running them, and rules and regulations and so on as well. And because the states run that, it also serves a greater good for the federal government because they're turning out educated citizens, citizens that will obey the law, citizens that will pay taxes. So it's a win-win for both. Now, for the 14th Amendment, it's also something you're going to also need to know as well, because the 14th Amendment is the first amendment that says that no state shall deprive its citizens of due process, equal protection of law. And if any state does that, for example, southern states in the 1960s and well before that, then the federal government can intervene to make sure that the states uphold that specific amendment as well. But the number one tool that we'll talk about in regards to federalism, the federal government intervening on states' affairs, is the Commerce Clause. And I'll talk about that a little bit more down the road here real fast. But it is the end all be all for the government. If they ever want to intervene, in states' affairs, it's all about, the Commerce Clause allows us to do this. And then, more importantly, the Necessary and Proper Clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that from time to time, it might be necessary and proper to add on responsibilities or powers in order to carry out the following duties, which they list later on as well. So the major disagreements come to us in the form of court cases. And the two you need to know for the exam are McCullough versus Maryland and United States versus Lopez. And just kind of a short synopsis of McCullough versus Maryland here, which I totally got wrong, which I will change as I'm speaking. Now, McCullough versus Maryland is talking about the federal government in its infancy. It's a very young nation. And in order to carry out some of its duties, it creates a national banking system to issue funds, issue currency, and so on as well. Well, it's just not one bank. They create charter banks and set them all up amongst the colonies at that time, and one set in Baltimore. Now, when Maryland takes a look at this national bank, which it isn't super excited about, it asks itself, where in the Constitution does it say that the federal government has the power to create banks? Because we can't find it. And because we can't find it, okay, we're going to tax the bank. You're in our territory, therefore we have the right to tax you. Now, the federal government's going to feel different. The federal government is going to obviously take this case to the Supreme Court, and they're going to say, listen, hold up. Yes, it doesn't say that we have the ability to create banks, but it's necessary and proper that we do so in order for us to collect taxes, issue currency, and so on as well. And more importantly, we feel as if Maryland is violating the Supremacy Clause, where they are jumping one level above what they're capable of. So remember, the Supremacy Clause is a chain of command, a protocol, if you will. At the lowest level is local, then states, number 2. Number 3 is the federal government, and number 1 is the Constitution. So in this situation, you have the state, which is below the federal government, trying to jump up a level and tax the federal government. Are they allowed to do that? And then we'll also have, Amendment 10 too, whereas, hey, listen, is this, is banking a state issue alone, or is it a federal government, or can the federal government intervene as well? Now, what the court does is they side with the federal government. And I put this first because it starts a long chain of federalism wins for the federal government. So whenever there's a situation where there's a disagreement amongst the federal government or the states amongst, like, whose power is it, McCullough versus Maryland is going to start a long strand of wins, if you will, for the federal government. And they say, listen, the decision is Congress can create a bank underneath the Necessary and Proper Clause. and the Supremacy Clause forbids Maryland from taxing. So it's a total win for the federal government. Now, that will go on for a long time. And it kind of won't change until we get to our second court case, which is United States versus Lopez. So in 1990, Congress is going to pass the Gun-Free School Zones Act, which is basically saying no handguns allowed in school or anywhere around a certain number of feet around a school and so on as well. Alfonso Lopez is going to be arrested and charged for violating this law. Now, what he's going to say is he's going to appeal the sentence, and what he's going to say is this, hey, listen, nobody agrees with the idea of guns being around schools, but we don't think that the federal government has the means or the constitutional power to complete this piece of legislation. Now, what's going to be at play here is the federal government's going to use the Commerce Clause to create the Gun-Free School Zones Act. Now, what I've said is the Commerce Clause, at least for the government, they've interpreted this clause many different ways. Because they have the ability to regulate interstate commerce, does that mean that it only applies to goods and services going from state to state? Does it apply from people traveling state to state? Does it apply to ideas traveling from state to state? Does it apply from internet text messages or phone text messages as well? These things are all up for debate, and the government feels as if it applies to all of them, that they have jurisdiction over all of them as well. Now, what they're going to say here is this. This is the justification they're going to try to use. They're going to say that public schools have a direct relation on United States interstate commerce. The better a school, the better it turns out a citizen. The citizen will start up businesses, and their businesses will trade back and forth with other states. It's a very generalized and vague justification for it. Now, when the decision comes down, the federal government is really expecting to win because, once again, they've pretty much won almost all the cases that they've been a part of when it regards to federalism, but they lose this one. All right, they lose it. And why they lose it is because the court, in a 5-4 decision, disagrees with the Commerce Clause pertaining to banning guns in schools. And they're once again going to say, hey, listen, nobody thinks that guns in school are a great idea, but Commerce Clause does not allow the federal government to create this piece of legislation. This is an issue that the states must take care of. So it's a big time win for the states as well. Now, whenever you're seeing federalism in action, which is 1.9, which we'll talk about, what they're talking about here is the federal government intervening on state affairs or the state government intervening on federal government affairs. Now, whenever the federal government wants to intervene here, I've listed a couple things that they're going to do here. Number one, the first thing that they're going to do is look for some sort of constitutional power that allows them to do so. Now, most often, they're going to go up to, which is to regulate interstate commerce as well. So right up there. That's going to be the number one power that they use. And they used that in the Civil Rights era. When the segregated South was making movie theaters segregated, buses segregated, motels segregated, what the federal government will say is, hey, listen, all of those segregated businesses have something in common. They service interstate travelers. We are in charge of interstate commerce, so therefore we should be able to tell these businesses they are not allowed to segregate, and the court agrees. So they're going to look for a constitutional power first. And another constitutional power that they'll look for is the necessary and proper clause, which is down here, which we saw in McCullough versus Maryland, that even though it doesn't say it in the Constitution, it's necessary and proper for us to be able to do this in order to carry out our duties. So they'll see that. Now, sometimes they can be the bad guy, which is mandating, which we see with the national drinking age at 21, or the 1990s Disabilities Act, where the federal government says, hey, states, you will do this or else. And the or else is we will take away your funding, or we'll punish the people that are in charge of the various groups that are supposed to get it done. So they'll do that. Or they'll be the nice guy with providing grants. And so the grants would be like this. Like they did this with school lunches. If the federal government wants to change up school lunches, if they want to make them more nutritious, okay, that's fine. But they don't have the ability to do so. That's a state decision. So what the federal government will do is this. They'll say, okay, hey, states, we have some money for you. Okay, you can take it if you want. All right, it's right here for you. You know, it's for your school lunches. Oh, you want it? Okay, that's great. Well, listen, if you take the money, you have to accept our rules. You have to change your school lunch programs and make them more nutritious. You have to follow these guidelines as well. So the money comes with strings, but states love money. But it comes with strings as well. That's how it's usually worked as well. Now, if you want to take a look at how it applies today, how federalism works today, look no farther than what we're going through right now with the coronavirus, all right? Where you have many different groups with multiple points of access, but yet all working together for a common goal, whether they know it or not. So you have the federal government we've talked about before we left, where they're declaring a national crisis, or they're enacting the Defense Production Act, which allows the federal government to tell industries in America to start producing goods. It pretty much puts them first in line. Or you see them unleashing FEMA, where the Federal Emergency Management Agency, that is going around to states like even Illinois and Chicago and going to the water tower and setting up makeshift hospitals for what they feel is going to be an overflow of coronavirus victims as well. So the federal government has its job. Now, state governments like Illinois are doing like shelter in place. Like if you're not part of an essential job, you stay home. They closed our schools. Governor J.B. Pritzker has traveled around the state to figure out what the various different counties need to fight the virus. And they're coordinating their efforts to make sure that those people receive those goods as well. And then city governments are closing public places like parks and public meeting spaces. And I don't know if you saw this or not, but in the very beginning, when we do the shelter in place, residents of Chicago are really not taking it very seriously. They're still running in public parks. They're just hanging out. They're walking. It almost looked like nothing was done. And all of a sudden, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, puts an end to it. Closes all parks, all public places, and so they have their role too. But you also see more people, the media, keeping Americans aware of the crisis, holding public officials accountable in press conferences and so on as well. So they're keeping us advised. Political parties are working with themselves and the other parties to craft bills like the stimulus bill that was passed that is supposed to help out in this time as well. And they're also coordinating their efforts in different agencies. And so what I mean by that is House Democrats are talking to Senate Democrats. Now, House Republicans are talking to Senate Republicans and the president, who is also a Republican too. So they're coordinating their efforts to make sure that they're on the same page as well. And then we, as everyday citizens, also have a role too. And if you don't know that, do yourself a favor, which I put here, and do a Google search of coronavirus cure, coronavirus vaccine. And you will find various different people, a lot of people attacking this issue from all different points, all around the world. Various different sciences, research labs, doctors, hospitals. Everybody is acting as their own mini laboratory, trying to find a cure, trying to find treatment, trying to produce a vaccine. So it shows you that, even though we have one topic here, coronavirus crisis, many different people at work, many different people adding to solutions, enacting, or more importantly, evaluating what is being done right now. So there we go. So that is the end of Unit 1. All right, the end of Unit 1. All you would have to do to kind of finish up is, even though your study guide, Unit 1 study guide, is not due, I would advise to do it. I think it's got some good information on it. It's specifically tailored to Unit 1. And you also are going to need to do by Saturday night the Unit 1 progress check, which is a multiple choice, 21 question multiple choice kind of exam, and an FRQ. And for the FRQs, I've graded some of them, and I give you feedback. So take a look at those as well. Okay? And at the end, once all the FRQs are turned in and I grade them, then I'll create a small video that talks about what I'm seeing and positives, negatives, and ways to improve and so on as well. So I'm not going to put a video up tomorrow. I'm just going to give you a heads up for that. What I'm going to do is give you an ability to kind of study or review Unit 1. So if you've not done the quizzes, do them. Or if you've not done the study guide, do them as well. I'm going to resume back on Thursday, and we'll start up with Unit 2, which is going to be, at least for us, what I'll do is I'll say we'll start up with civil rights and civil liberties. That's what we'll do. We'll start on Thursday. Okay, so miss you, take care, and see you on Thursday.